Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're tackling a question I'm sure many of you have pondered. How much value do those star performers really bring to an organization? Those top players everyone's always trying to recruit and retain.
It's a question that's definitely harder to answer than you might think.
Right. And luckily, some researchers decided to take a deep dive into this very topic. We're looking at some fascinating research from the International Journal of Human Resource Management.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and their findings might just make you rethink how much emphasis you place on those top performers.
Okay, I'm all ears. What did they find?
Well, they started by really defining what they mean by star performers. They're talking about folks whose output significantly surpasses their peers.
So not just a little bit better, but like way more productive.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that they found these stars are actually more common than you might think.
Really?
Yeah, over 80% of the groups they studied had these standout performers.
Hmm. So they're not as rare as we might assume. I wonder if we could visualize that somehow.
They actually did. Think about your typical bell curve, the one that shows how performance is distributed.
Gotcha, the classic bell curve.
Right. But when you have star performers, it creates what they call a heavy right-tailed distribution.
Okay, so instead of a nice symmetrical bell, you get this long tail stretching out to the right because those high achievers are pulling the average up.
Exactly. And you can really see this difference visually in Figure 1 from the study. It's pretty striking.
It makes you wonder because a lot of HR practices, like performance evaluations, tend to assume everyone falls neatly under that normal distribution. But if we've got all these stars skewing the curve.
Then maybe those traditional methods aren't giving us an accurate picture of their impact.
Right. And that leads to the big question this study tries to answer. What's the real financial value of getting those star performers, especially when it comes to hiring?
So how much is it actually worth for a company to invest in finding and recruiting those top players?
Exactly. And to get to the bottom of this, they looked at data from a ton of companies, over 800,000 workers across all sorts of fields.
Wow, that's a huge sample size.
Right. They really wanted to get a solid understanding of how much value good hiring practices bring when it comes to those stars.
Okay, so how did they actually measure that value? Did they just look at salaries or something?
It's a bit more complicated than that. They use several different ways to calculate the financial benefits, which they call utility analysis procedures.
Utility analysis procedures.
Yeah, basically different ways of figuring out the financial impact. But the key difference between these methods is how they factor in, or don't factor in, the impact of those star performers.
So some methods take those stars into account and others kind of ignore them?
Right, but one method stood out called the observed distribution procedure. This one uses the actual real-world distribution of employee output.
Ah, so it acknowledges that some people are way out there on that right tail, crushing it. It's not just assuming everyone falls neatly on that bell curve.
Exactly. And when they used this method, get this,
What did they find?
the value of those good HR practices, specifically for acquiring those stars, was up to 9 times greater.
9 times. Seriously.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. Traditional methods seem to be significantly undervaluing the contributions of those star performers.
Wow. That's incredible. So companies are missing out on a lot of potential value by not fully understanding the impact of their top players.
Absolutely. But there's actually another interesting layer to this whole thing, and it's the idea of diminishing returns.
Okay, diminishing returns. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It basically means that while those top performers are incredibly valuable, building a team entirely of superstars might not be the best approach.
So it's not just about stacking your team with as many star players as you can find.
Right. It's not always a simple one-to-one relationship.
I see, I see. So what factors contribute to these diminishing returns in a team setting?
Well, one of the things they found is that time plays a big role. Over longer periods, like a whole career, you're more likely to see those stars really distinguish themselves.
That makes sense. In fields with shorter performance cycles, those stars might not have as much time to make a huge impact, right?
Exactly. Another factor is the ceiling for performance.
Really?
Yeah, think about it like this. You have fields like professional sports or entertainment where there's a lot of room for individual achievement.
Yeah, in those areas, the superstars can really reach incredible heights.
Right. And the study found that in those types of fields, the impact of those stars is even more pronounced. But in fields with a lower performance ceiling, where everyone's kind of operating within a narrower range, you might not see that same dramatic difference.
So the nature of the work itself has a big influence on how much impact those stars can actually have on the outcomes.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The actual shape of that performance distribution, meaning how those individual outputs are spread out, can also affect those diminishing returns.
Okay, now you're going to have to walk me through this one. We're talking about the shape of that heavy right-tailed distribution again, right?
Exactly. Imagine a situation where the differences in performance at the very top among those superstars are actually pretty small.
So even though they're all top performers, they're all kind of clustered together at the top.
Right. And in cases like that, adding another star might not give you a huge additional benefit because the performance gap between them is already so small.
Ah, I get it. It's
Yeah.
like if you already have three amazing salespeople who are all bringing in about the same amount of revenue, adding a fourth one might not significantly boost your sales.
Exactly. It's not just about having those stars on your team. It's about understanding how those star performers are distributed and how their individual outputs actually compare to each other.
This whole concept of diminishing returns is making me rethink how we approach building and managing teams. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking that more stars automatically equals better results.
Right. And I think this research is a good reminder that it's not quite that simple.
For sure.
It's a reminder that building a successful team is about more than just collecting a bunch of talented individuals. It's about figuring out how those individuals work together, how their strengths complement each other, and how the structure of the work itself impacts both individual and team performance.
Absolutely. So what does all of this mean for our listeners? What key takeaways should they be thinking about as they're listening to this deep dive?
I think if you're someone who hires or manages people, this research has some important implications. First of all, don't underestimate the power of those star performers.
They can really make a massive difference.
Absolutely. But at the same time, don't fall into the trap of thinking that just adding more and more stars will automatically lead to better results.
Right. It's not just about chasing after the biggest names or the most impressive resumes.
Exactly. You need to consider the context, the structure of the work, and the dynamics of the team.
Think about the performance distribution in your field. Are those top performers really separated by a huge margin, or are they more closely grouped together?
Yeah, and how can you create a team environment where individual brilliance can shine, but without overshadowing or undermining the contributions of other team members?
Because at the end of the day, a truly successful team is one where everyone feels valued and empowered to do their best work, regardless of whether they're considered a star or not.
I completely agree, and that's really the key takeaway here. Recognize the value of top performers, but don't let that blind you to the importance of building a well-rounded and supportive team where everyone can contribute.
I love that.
This has been a really insightful conversation. It's given me a lot to think about.
Me too. And I'm sure our listeners will be pondering these ideas as well. So where do we go from here? We've been focusing on the impact of those high achievers, but what about the rest of the team? Does the presence of those star performers somehow make those non-stars less valuable?
That's a really interesting question. And it makes you think about how we value different types of contributions on a team, right? I mean, just because someone isn't a star in the traditional sense doesn't mean their work isn't valuable.
Exactly. In fact, I'm wondering if there might even be a kind of synergy between those star performers and the other members of the team.
Oh, absolutely. Star performers can be incredibly inspiring and motivating to their colleagues.
Yeah, they can really raise the bar and set a standard for excellence.
Right. And at the same time, those other team members might be providing essential support, collaboration, and diverse perspectives. And those things might actually be helping the stars shine even brighter.
Yeah. It's like a basketball team, right? You got
Well,
your star player who scores all the points.
right.
But they still need their teammates to pass the ball, play defense, set those picks, create the opportunities for them to make those shots.
Exactly. It's a team effort. It's not just about individual talent. It's about how those talents work together to achieve something bigger.
It all comes back to that, doesn't it? So this research really makes us think about how we recognize and reward different types of contributions. How do we create a culture where everyone feels valued and motivated to do their best, regardless of whether they're at the top of that performance distribution or not?
It's a tough question, and it requires us to really shift our mindset. We need to move away from just focusing on those easily quantifiable metrics and start recognizing that everyone has something unique to offer, even if it's not always easy to measure.
It's about the whole picture, not just the individual pieces. This has been such a fascinating conversation. It's really challenged my thinking about talent and teams. I think our listeners have a lot to ponder after this deep dive.
Definitely. And the next time you're putting a team together or managing one, I think it's important to remember to think about the whole constellation, not just the brightest star.
I love that analogy. Well said. Thanks for joining us today. And to all our listeners out there, until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.